in this country without recovering the education sector. So we need, as you see that we are saying there's a health emergency, I'm telling you the education emergency is even much bigger than the health emergency, really. So we need to look at education as an emergency and plan for it as an emergency.
Well, Mr. Mike Chironde,
yes,
Chairperson, Proprietors of Private Schools Association, how much toll has this closure had on you as owners of schools and, of course, as a business?
Well, thank you for giving this opportunity. It's really massive because we've looked at how the business is moving. I could even look at it in 3 phases. The phase 1 is the learners themselves, the teachers and the parents. The first place is that when we look at our learners, we've been trying to look for them. They are lost where they are, and they don't know what to do. Some have even run out of school, some have got pregnant, some have gone into work. And you know, the youngsters, when they start making some money, coming out of that section is not easy. And when it comes to we, the proprietors, we have a very big challenge is that we have to take care of these schools, which we have no income at all. And we have the loans to take care of, which we can't even afford anymore. And then we also have the human resource, the team we are working with, the teachers, the scaries, the cooks, who are now not earning any more income at all, and they're starving. They keep coming back to us as their bosses, and we've lost it because you can't talk of being a boss and you cannot help out. When people get lost their loved ones and they call you, we have issues with the sickness and you cannot help. So it's a very big challenge we are into, I would say.
Well, there was an attempt at reopening, partial reopening.
Yes.
Did it in a way bring some relief?
Yes, it did, and I thank the Ministry of Education. It did it quite well. And as we are bringing these people, we are bringing the parents, rather the teachers back in the phases, the students. It did some relief, indeed. Though now when they talk about that some of us or some of our...
You lowered the guard.
Yes.
Especially in private schools.
I would say yes at some point, because some of our friends really lowered it out a bit. But it's not general that all of us did so. So and I think also it goes back to the authority who are supposed to inspect. The inspection team at the district also didn't follow it quite well. They did it once, and then and you know, with people when there's relaxing, they think things are okay. So even me, I condemn those who had children who had COVID and they didn't declare, because we knew exactly what to do. We were informed that when you discover a problem, get in touch with the task force, because we had all the numbers, and they rescued the situation. Maybe now, rather than us going into lamenting, we need to think about the way forward, because the business our business are the children who are there getting wasted. And that's the business of the Ministry of Education, that's our business and the nation. So I think we need to think about the way forward.
Mike, by the look of things,
yes. Are
you ready in case government announced that you're reopening soon?
Yes.
Are private schools ready?
Yes, we are, because even currently we are into mobilizing our members to go for vaccination. We even think now the government, one of the things as they think about reopening, because we still have the backlog of the senior 1, the senior 2, the senior 3, and senior 5s who are not yet promoted in primary 1, 2, and 3. They've never gone to school close to a year now. 2 years, actually, close to 2 years. So we need to think about that group. But for us, we are ready. How are we going to... We already have the gears in place. But there's something government needs to do. One of it is that we need to get these the testing kits either cheaper, so that the schools can buy them if the government cannot, but if the government can provide. Because one of the problems, I would like to talk about where we lost the game from in the reopening. So when they opened up the first phase, and then the senior 3 and senior 5s went back home for a short holiday. in coming back, because they were going back to the community, which is sick. We didn't have any measure to test to know who is sick and who not. And at the end of the day, you just do this simple testing of the gun. It doesn't, if someone has got COVID for a day, maybe you can't know the temperatures. So I think the way forward should be, as the children come back, before even we test, before we even vaccinate everyone, these groups can come back with the testing. And even we need to think about a strategy for cities, because this corona is more into the cities.
Well,
city schools to be handled differently.
I need to engage Dr. Kidris again. And Dr. Kidris, one of the issues being raised is vaccination of teachers and also test and tracing being improved in schools. Does the ministry have the capacity as we speak, or any plan to have all teachers vaccinated? And how soon will this happen?
Thank you very much. Yes, the ministry has been in discussion with the Ministry of Health, and it's been agreed that indeed, as it was when the vaccination started, that teachers should be made a top priority in the vaccines that come. You know that we are not receiving enough at any one point, but that's now an agreed point, that whatever comes, teachers should be fully mobilized, but also prioritized. So that one, yes, is fully agreed. And from the scientists and others, it's clear that if as many teachers and staff generally in the schools are vaccinated and therefore they are safe, then it gives more confidence for parents to send children to school.
Well, thank you very much. Dr. Mary Goretti, what is fundamental here is the safety of learners and the teachers and all the other stakeholders. Do you see this question of safety being handled during this time when schools are locked down?
Yes. I think even before the schools closed, or even before they reopened in the first phase, I think that is something that we should have worked on to ensure that actually it worked, because there's research elsewhere. We have never had a pandemic like this, but we have had Ebola in West Africa, for example. In West Africa, before schools reopened, Ebola had not been completely eradicated, but they made sure that they put in place very high measures of hygiene in schools. And the pandemic did not erupt again in schools. But also, really, the prolonged closure of schools is a good thing. But it's not the only thing that can curb the transmission. Actually, the scientists who have modeled, and they have indicated that the closure of schools as one of the factors, it only contributes about 2 to 4% of reducing the deaths of COVID-19. So we can actually do this quite safely and ensure that all schools are supported. I think one thing that we did was to leave these things to the guts of the schools alone to ensure that they put these measures in place. But I think there must be also some kind of support coming from the central government to ensure that every school complies, but also the constant supervision and monitoring.
How practical were the interventions introduced or proposed by government? Take, for instance, online learning, radio and TV learning. Did they bear any fruit in your assessment?
I think anything that contributes to learning, it can supplement. I think even when schools reopen, those measures should remain in place. The online learning, the radio learning, the learning that is taking place in the communities, the printed learning. But there's one thing that we have to agree, that you cannot really replace the power of a teacher teaching, a good teacher teaching a child in a school. So all these things contributed, and they were also not really equitable. I was talking to you informally about the small study that we did in four districts. It was actually initiated by the Ministry of Education in the Buganda Kingdom with Mutesa Wanuriyo University, and Uwezo Uganda partnered in it. We did investigate in 3 districts. I remember it was Rukungiri, Bukoma, Nsimbi, Mukono, and Kumi. And one of the things we investigated that was August, September last year, 2020. How many of these kids or homes actually accessed the printed learning materials? And from those, I'm not saying that is a representative sample, but only about 20% of the households or kids actually got those printed materials. So there has been inequity in all these measures, but every little actually does. I don't want to discourage that. Don't distribute materials, don't do radio lessons, don't do online learning. Let's all these things contribute. But one thing I think that we should be looking at the moment is that continue with that learning in the communities, but let us find a way of safely reopening the schools.
Dr. Kedris, where are the radios that you promised for learners?
Maybe before I give you radios, Kasumba, I should just say that what Goreti has said is true, and that is what we expected them to have found from that research. Because when we did the first effort of continuity of learning, we looked at the divide of the country from the UBOS information as to who can access learning by TV, and that was slightly less than 30%. Who can access radios by radios from the radio ownership of the data that was there, and that took us to about 70%. And so we agreed that since we didn't have enough money, we should have study material printed for the remaining approximately 30%. Eventually, we got money anyway for 25%. So the distribution was supposed to be done by the very lowest of the levels, who know which household does not own a radio and therefore is not accessing learning. Unfortunately, because we were fully locked out, when it went to the local governments, they just shared them out and said, we have 10 sub-counties, these are the materials which have come, let them go like this and that. But the finding just validates the purpose for which we had made those study materials. So I'm happy, Goreti, that there is already a research finding on that one. Yes, the radio buying was not conclusive because Parliament did not give us money to buy the radios, and so we couldn't continue with it, and that was last financial year. And towards the end of that, the COVID situation had improved, and we thought, well, maybe for now, since we hoped open for everybody, remember by the time the second closure came, the last lot, so P1 to P3 and Senior 2, were supposed to report at school the very next Monday. So we thought we would just continue with the brand, as Goreti said, and indeed we shall continue with the brand because we are aware that our learners have lost almost 2 years, and we are still aware that they may not be at school all the time, all of them together, and so the brand will continue. But for the radios, that's what happened. The Parliament did not appropriate the money for buying the radios.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kidris. Mike, yes, please. With this prolonged closure, I would imagine that your hope of having schools opening this year is dimmed. Am I right?
In a way you are. In a way you are. Because we've lost the hope in a way. But we think the government has to, or Minister of Education has to think about, we are worried of the backlog of these children who have not yet been promoted. Yet we have now the candidate. They have released the results, and we have the S1s, the S5s, and we don't even have the candidates, by the way, for the next year. So I hope there is a plan. And that will just only help those small groups to get out. And then we hope that there's measures to help the reopening of school as early as early
What
January.
kind of conversation are you having with the Minister of Education as proprietors of private schools?
The engagement is not so much. They are not engaging us so much, but we are trying our level best through our Department of Private Education, through the Commission of Private Section. But we've not really got serious engagement. We also think the ministry should keep engaging us, and we plan together, because we are holding especially about 51% of the community of the children across the country. So we are quite big stakeholders, and many at a time we are just engaged to just inform us that you are doing this and this and that. So we pray that if we could be engaged a little bit further, and we can work together to fight this problem.
Well, as we take a break, Dr. Mary Goretti, we are weighing the risks and benefits of reopening schools. But what is at stake now is the future of businesses. For instance, some schools are closing down. Two, the big question would be, will these learners ever catch up with what they've lost? And what will it mean? What will this vacuum mean for the future of education?
All right. So I think it's a very big question. We need to weigh the benefits and the risks. For me, I think the benefits of reopening schools outweigh actually the risks. They do, actually. Because you're not only talking about loss of business here, you're talking about loss of a generation. You're talking about loss of the future of the country. We are losing a generation if nothing is actually done immediately. I told you at the beginning that we are looking at a crisis, and it has to be acted on right now. Otherwise, we are going to lose a generation. So,
it's tough. Well, we'll be taking a very quick break, and certainly my guests will be back after the break. The big question will be, as the debate on reopening continues, how about the capacity of the ministry and other stakeholders to do more testing, tracing, isolation, and vaccination? Is the education sector really looking into this direction, or things are experiencing a stalemate? That and much more after the break. Good morning. Welcome back. Still discussing the future of education in the midst of the pandemic. Quite a lot of things are emerging, especially regarding the plan for reopening. Other sectors have partially reopened, while schools are in a complete blackout with no end in sight yet. Let me get back to Dr. Kidris. Dr. Kidris, what scenarios have you already mapped out in the event that reopening happens?
Well, first of all, I want to say that that the medical training schools will be soon opening, hopefully before the end of this month. And there is a concrete draft plan for the rest. As we have already discussed, it has been done cautiously, it has been done systematically, taking care of all those variances that are facing us during this COVID-19 situation. So soon, when the process is complete and approved, it will be shared with the public. But we have a very concrete plan of what can we do, how can we do it, what options can we try. All these are with us on our tables, and they are being discussed at various levels.
Wouldn't it be prudent of the Ministry of Education to engage stakeholders like Uwezo and the proprietors of private schools? They don't seem to have an idea of what you're planning. You're holding it too close to your chest.
This is not true. Even last week, was it on Wednesday or Thursday, we had a meeting, the technical team of the Ministry of Education, the scientists, the technical team of Ministry of Health, and we had invited all stakeholders, UNATU, private schools. Incidentally, I'm learning that the private school proprietors have now two associations. There is one where there is FENEI, and actually Kaboyo from FENEI was part of those who attended. It was a blended meeting. Some were online, and a few of us were in the boardroom. And so we actually invited them. So we are not leaving them behind. We do appreciate the contribution they make. It's government's policy to have private providers of various social services get involved in providing services for our people. So we are not neglecting them, but maybe they also need to put their house in order. If they actually have two groups, can they synchronize and have a bigger voice? Can they synchronize and get information back to them better? Maybe that's something that Mike could think about after this interview this morning.
Yes, can you handle the release of this plan? Because there is a bit of anxiety coming from all sectors, all corners.
Of course, the anxiety has to be there. We are all as a society anxious about everything, actually. although the Bible says we shouldn't be anxious about anything, but I think all of us, parents and children, and with the ministry, all of us, business itself, the way things are being done, we are all anxious. But one by one, we are moving forward. So don't worry, it will be released. And once it's released, then we shall work with our different partners to see that we implement it fully and we keep safe, but also our children learn. I just wanted to pick on something Mike mentioned, the aspect of some, not all, of the schools not taking these things very seriously as part and parcel. If they discovered immediately after the children had come back that actually some children came back sick and it was handled, we would not be in this crisis. We would actually have been handled, and it would be now really something that would have carried us forward. I want to say that head teachers are the first inspectors, and the school management committees, the boards of governors, the proprietors are part of the immediate monitoring team. And it's very clear in our Act 2008, in all our guidelines, how each of those teams should do their work. So I want to invite all of us as society that education is a joint responsibility. Don't sit there and think ministry. Who is ministry? You are part of it. You are implementing education. And so we all need to do our part. And me, I'm thinking from what Goretti said at the beginning, that there were already struggles for learning even before COVID. I'm thinking that there will be a silver lining at the end of this big cloud that seems to be surrounding us, because all of us are rethinking, how can we teach better? How can we teach differently? How can we pick the skills we had learned from EGRA before the COVID-19 and have it rolled out to all these learners who have to learn quite a bit of material in a short time when they come back? So we have all those with us, and we shall continue to work with our stakeholders to see how to make it better.
Well, Dr. Kidris, thank you very much for making time to speak to us and highlight some of the areas of what the Education Ministry is doing. Have a lovely day.
Thank you so much, NBS, for continually working with us this journey.
Cheers. Have a lovely day. Dr. Mary Goretti, how keen are you on reading into the plan of the Ministry of Education?
I'm actually extremely keen. And I think I'll start from where Dr. Kedres ended. I think educating a child takes the whole village. And I think having these partnerships is very, very critical, even in the plans for the reopening of schools. She talked about the stakeholders that have been involved in the conversations. She talked about the private schools. Again, you are still within the education sector. I think we need to open up this discussion to include even civil society, academics, researchers, the communities themselves. It needs to be really, really a big debate so that we all agree. So I'll be very, very keen to get an insight into a glimpse into the plan. But talking
what
about
would be an ideal exit plan?
So for me, actually, I think we need to go back to the roots. Let's also look at the neighboring countries. What are they doing?
Benchmarking.
Let's benchmark. Kenya reopened. Actually, Tanzania never closed at all. Was there an eruption of COVID-19 and children died in tens of thousands? Not really. So there's a way how they did it. We can learn from each other. But also our own plan, as Dr. Kedres talked about, the reopening, the first reopening. And Michael also confessed that it was okay if it was actually followed. That things happen somewhere. But because my hand is sick, I don't cut it off, or I don't kill myself because my hand is actually infected. I think when we reopen the schools, we need to acknowledge that actually there are going to be cases in some schools. And when those cases emerge, we shouldn't shut down the entire system. We can handle case by case, even if it's district by district, but school by school, rather than shutting down the entire system.
Test, isolate.
Test, isolate, handle there. So because even here in the recent closure, not all schools were infected. I think there were just a few cases. Even in terms of death, I remember, even if one child dies, that's a disaster for the country. But the cases have been also very, very isolated. Can we gradually reopen and handle those cases, case by case? For me, I'm actually totally against the full closure, full blast of the entire education system.
Mike,
Yeah.
Yes.
you partly take blame for this prolonged closure of schools because you concealed information about sick learners. You did not follow the SOPs. And your organizations are in complete disarray. There is one the other side. The Ministry of Education is asking, who do we engage at such a time? How better can you put your houses in order?
All right, thank you. I think already with experience we've seen, we've already put ourselves into order, and within our association have come up with a task force on the district level within ourselves, because we've known how it has affected us, and we believe that we can handle. And when we talk about that we had some few schools, we're not talking about 80% that had those issues. It may just maybe 5 or 10% of
Can you treat them in isolation?
Yes, you can. And where we actually, let me tell you where the main problem was. When they closed schools, in the transit as children were going back home, they also had to get the disease on the way. Remember the kids who were staying in the park for 2-3 days?
So it became chaotic.
Exactly. Much as we are blamed somehow, but the real closure brought problems. May I agree with the idea of saying, let us handle case by case. If the schools and some particular schools not following the SOPs, close that one. Then the kids go to the next school. You know, we get tough because when we just close the entire system, even those who are doing the right things, they also affected the same way. But I believe that if we put in place the serious SOPs, then we also isolate a few, because when you look at these children, even if they get infected, they are not, they don't get worse as elder people.
When teachers were being compelled to take the jab,
yes,
some of them stayed away.
Yes.
And you didn't pursue them.
No, we actually, I ran a very serious campaign, and the vaccine got finished. Because we engaged everyone and we went full blast to see that people are vaccinated. But in the beginning, you knew the controversial which was there about the vaccine, and everyone was not clear what's going on, and some people didn't. But now we've now restated the idea of everyone go and be vaccinated.
As proprietors of private schools, what do you make of the comment that was made by the Minister of Finance that if you're under the weight of loans, dispose them off?
It's because maybe this challenge is not on the minister's side. He's happy, he has a salary, he has other things. He's not in our position. But we've taken it and we've started selling some of our properties, sir, to say that we take care of that. Because it's our problem, it's not your problem. And we felt it really hit us seriously. We didn't take it simple. And as a senior citizen, we didn't expect that from him. But it's going to come with a big cost on this country because we are losing these schools and many children will not go back to school.
Well, it's very likely that most schools are going to be sold off or are being converted into other things. What does this mean to education?
It does. I think that
the premises are now turning into hotels, stores, lodges.
Yeah. That's why I said earlier that we have to weigh the benefits and the cost of keeping the schools closed. So the issue of keeping the schools closed is not just a health benefit or a health loss. We are losing a very big deal. So you're talking about businesses closing, schools closing, but you're also looking at teachers exiting the teaching profession. So when you gradually reopen, you actually face a crisis of recruiting teachers who have actually diverted business. But you're also facing a crisis of children who have dropped out. Sorry?
Do private schools really make sense in crying out to government to bail them out in such times?
Yes. When we talk about private, the schools are private, but the children going to those schools are not private. So when we're talking about a stimulus package, we shouldn't just be talking about government schools or government institutions. And here we are not only talking about actually, of course, primary schools and secondary schools are very, very important because that is the foundation, but also higher education institutions. When you talk about e-learning, we said, good thing that I think higher education institutions are gradually reopening, starting with medical schools, but that's gradual. But when you still keep them closed and you say everybody should study online, have we given them any support? And that is why I said, let's look at education as an emergency. Like we have said, health is an emergency. I think they mobilized, I don't know how many trillions of money. We should do the same for education. If we are to ensure the safety of the kids, if we are to ensure the continuity of learning, actually when we talk about reopening of schools, we should also think about what happens to the learning when the schools reopen. Is it going to be business as usual? No. Are you going to cover a syllabus that was supposed to be for a whole year in 8 months or 9 months? We don't have that time. So can we even start thinking about, and that's why I want to look into, to have an insight into the plans of the Ministry of Education. How are we even planning to compress the syllabus or the curriculum to ensure that learning is actually fast-tracked? It's fast-tracked. It's not business as usual. And Minister of Education has to take
But is this rethink possible?
It is very possible. It is extremely possible. You know, over the weekend I was talking to one of my nieces who is in primary 5, and I was asking about what they learned when the schools had just reopened, and she was telling me about a topic on bees in primary 5 in science. And she said they had learned about bees for a whole month. And I'm like, what? For a whole month? I'm not criticizing this, but do you have to learn about bees for a whole month? We can actually start compressing this curriculum by starting to ask ourselves, what is it that we want primary school kids to actually be able to do or to know at the end of going through the primary education sector? And we scale down the content by focusing so much on the competences themselves.
Well, we're getting out of here, but
anyway,
there's one question I need to ask both of you. If reopening was to happen, would you go for staggered reopening or full reopening?
I think for me, initially the staggered, because you also don't want to go into the deep water immediate. Much as we actually, after what we had learned after the first reopening, we should now be moving into the full blast. But it appears we didn't learn much from the first reopening.
Are you for staggered or full reopening?
I think we are into stagnant because we don't want to risk. But as we get into stagnant, there must be plan for full reopening. Like especially...
Yeah, but when you went for staggered, the complaint was the cost of managing the school was quite high.
Yes, you know, that's what she was talking about, that as you do these plans, is there some support? Because when you just open one class and you are not minding how these people manage these classes to finance, that's an issue with the government. But when you look at the security of the children and the teachers, I think when you go stagnant, it's much safer. Staggered is much safer.
But also shifts. I think there's teaching in shifts that has been tried in the refugee settlements. I mean, I've done research in the refugee settlements. You're talking about hundreds of kids, thousands of kids in the same compound. So we can talk about shifts. You can reopen the entire system, but they learn in shifts. And then others actually continue learning from home with these other measures that have been put in place. The radios, the TVs, and the printed learning materials.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mary Goretti. Thank you very much, Dr. Kedris. I know you're still on watching us. And thank you, Mr. Chironde, for speaking to us, joining us this morning in the discussion around education. Let's engage online. What's the future of education in the midst of this uncertainty on reopening? Good morning.
ekya COVID-19 kijja kuggwa only if we